Are you considering medical school? If you are, have you ever wondered what undergraduate program should I actually take to give me the best shot? If you've ever wondered about these things, then you're in the right place. Today, I'll be talking about various programs, what'll give you an advantage, and what might actually be hurting your chances without you even knowing it. And if you're feeling overwhelmed with all of the different options out there, don't worry. Today, I'll break down different programs, common misconceptions, underrated options that you might want to consider, plus tips that most students don't hear until it's too late. First, I want to start off by talking about the general landscape of medical school, or more specifically, med school applications in Canada. It's no secret that it's extremely competitive to get into medical school. First, let's talk about acceptance rates in Canada versus the US. The rates of acceptance in Canada versus the US are much lower, despite the shortage of doctors that we have in Canada. Just to give some numbers, Canada is at about 16% compared to about 43% acceptance in the US. That's less than half. Now, there are fewer medical schools in Canada compared to the US, which contributes to the overall shortage of spots for potential future doctors. Canadian medical schools also have high admissions requirements, which means that there's strong, fierce competition to get in. And we can't ignore the differences in how different metrics are assessed. So in Canadian pre-med circles, there's a saying that GPA is king, which really emphasizes how important it is to have a strong GPA when applying to Canadian medical schools. Whereas in the US, it's increasingly a more holistic review process. They stand by factors beyond academics, such as personal statements, essay questions, and interviews to assess if an applicant has those ideal doctor characteristics that they're looking for. With that said, there are Canadian medical schools that are known to have a more holistic admissions process. Did you know that Canadian medical schools like TMU are known to have more holistic medical school admissions processes, considering applicants' achievements and personal qualities beyond just academics? With such a competitive landscape, when it comes to applying to Canadian medical schools, GPA, MCAT, personal statements, essays, and interviews are key. And your choice of undergrad can really impact this whole process. It can set you up for success or make the road a lot harder. And with that, let's look at different programs and what can give you a boost, as well as what can hurt your chances. So there's this myth that in order to get into medical school, you need the right pre-med undergrad degree. Now, the reality for Canadian medical schools is that there's no single pre-med degree. Canadian medical schools generally don't require a specific undergraduate degree. So how do you choose the right pre-med undergraduate program for you? First, I'll talk about what makes an ideal pre-med degree. Then I'll organize the different program options into two major categories: science programs and non-science programs. Finally, I'll go over some considerations and tips to help you make your selection. Now, of course, I do want to mention that this is based on my own findings, so it's important that you do your own research. Now, with all of that said, what actually makes an ideal pre-med degree? The answer is pretty straightforward and yet a little bit complicated. Essentially, there's no single perfect pre-med degree. There are a couple of things to look out for, however, and those things are something that gives you the best shot at achieving a high GPA. This is absolutely key. Also, something that prepares you for the MCAT ideally, especially if you're applying to schools that actually require the MCAT. Now, granted, this is a nice to have, but not necessarily a need to have. And finally, a program that offers enough freedom so that you can pursue extracurricular activities, volunteering, clubs, research, and other activities. All right, let's dive into some specific programs, starting with McMaster Health Sci. So I mentioned McMaster first because if you take a look at U of T's admission stats and what schools their first-year students went to before medical school, take a look at the clear winner here. It's McMaster. 86 out of the 291 medical students were from McMaster. Now, not all of these students were necessarily Health Sci students, but McMaster Health Sci does have a reputation for having a lot of benefits for students who want to pursue medical school. For example, the program is known to offer its students freedom so they can pursue activities and extracurriculars that interest them while being able to maintain a strong GPA. Absolutely critical. Plus, they use problem-based learning so students develop critical thinking skills, which are key in medical school. A quick con is that McMaster Health Sci is one of the toughest programs to get into in Canada, but if you get in, you can really set yourself up for success on the road to pursuing medical school. Next, let's talk about Western Med Sci. Check this out. According to Western, 82% of Bachelor of Med Sci grads go on to study medicine, dentistry, related professions, graduate studies, or a second degree, with 24% going on to study medicine. Now, this makes a lot of sense because there's a strong science foundation from their curriculum. Plus, there are so many great hands-on learning opportunities. There are opportunities for research, including scholars electives, where students who are accepted start doing their own research in second year with the guidance of a faculty mentor. Pretty cool. Next, this list wouldn't be complete without U of T Life Sci. Now, the University of Toronto, or U of T, has a special place in my heart because, well, it's where I graduated from. The University of Toronto has a strong reputation and access to various research opportunities, clubs, groups, world-class profs, and more. For me, personally, I was able to participate in the Campus Women's Club, where I had the opportunity to connect with other amazing U of T women and raise funds for initiatives like Women's Heart Health. This wouldn't have been possible without U of T. Now, as much as I grew from my experience at U of T, it's no secret that it's a rigorous and competitive environment. So maintaining a high GPA is tough. It's not for everyone, but it might be for you. Moving right along, let's talk about Queen's Health Sci. When it comes to Queen's Health Sci, there's lots of interdisciplinary learning. What's also really unique is that they go beyond memorization, and instead, it's about actively engaging with what you learn and solving problems. There's so much hands-on learning where students can actually go into cadaver labs, for example. What's also really special about Queen's Health Sci is their flipped classroom approach, which really encourages independent learning, much like medical school. A quick con, however, is that for students who do like didactic learning or that typical lecture style, this flipped classroom style might take some getting used to. Now for some honorable mentions, we've got Life Sci at Ottawa, Waterloo, Brock, and Laurier. These are great options when it comes to scoring a high GPA. I won't be going into any of these specifically today, but leave a comment if you'd like more in-depth info about any of these programs. If there's enough interest, I may make a separate video about it. Next, let's talk about non-science programs. Again, med schools aren't looking for a specific degree per se, so it's still possible to take a non-science program, even if your goal is to pursue medical school. It is, however, the more non-traditional route. Let's talk about some pros and cons of non-science programs. Some pros are that you'd stand out from other applicants, especially if the majority of applicants are in science programs. You might also have a leg up on the MCAT, especially the CARS section of the MCAT. Yes, the dreaded CARS section. Remember, the MCAT is just as much or more so about reading comprehension and test strategy than science fact regurgitation per se. So having strong reading, analysis, and critical thinking skills will come in handy for those 8 to 10 minute passages. Some cons are that it might be more difficult to get a 4.0 in essay-based courses because these courses are typically more subjective. Plus, you might need to take science courses for schools that have science prereqs if it's not already built into your existing program. You might also feel isolated from your pre-med peers. As well, if you're taking the MCAT, which covers biology, chemistry, physics, and other subjects, you might need more content review. In terms of examples of different programs, there are endless examples out there. Psychology, political science, sociology, business, U of T, Queen's, McMaster, other schools, you name it. By the way, if you're not sure which of these paths plays best to your strengths, that's exactly the kind of support that I love helping students with. Reach out anytime for a consultation, a link is below. Next, I want to give you some tips to help you make your decision about undergrad. When it comes to applying to medical schools in Canada, GPA plays a big role. I know I've said it many times throughout this video, but it's that important. In fact, if we take a look at a few Canadian medical schools that actually published this data, we can see what the average accepted GPA looks like. Here are some stats for U of T, McMaster, and Queen's. Remember, a weak GPA is hard to fix. Focus on a program that interests and motivates you, something that you'll do well in. Now, you might be wondering, are there any other factors to consider? First, I want to mention grading policies and GPA inflation and deflation. Some universities and even specific faculties are known to have tougher grading curves. For example, U of T Life Sci is notorious for being rigorous. A lower GPA can really hurt your chances, no matter how strong the program is. So my quick tip, ask current students for GPA trends in your program. Another factor to consider is support for research. Does your program make it easy to get involved in research? Some schools have partnerships with hospitals or research institutes. Take advantage of that. McMaster Health Sci, for instance, offers early exposure to research, even as early as first and second year. Western has scholars electives that gives students early lab access and faculty mentorship. U of T offers things like the Research Opportunity Program, or ROP, starting in second year. Queens has the Maudsley Educational Research Internship for health sciences students, which provides first or second year Queens Health Sci students with a mentoring experience to develop their educational research skills. Another thing to consider is flexibility in terms of course selection. Something to look out for is a program that lets you balance science with electives like writing, humanities, or other GPA boosting courses. This can really help keep your GPA high and also develop well-rounded skills for med school essays and interviews. Another thing to consider is proximity to home or support network. Moving away can be exciting, but if you're someone who thrives with family nearby or a familiar environment, adjusting to being on your own might take some time. Something that comes to mind is a friend of mine who moved 2 hours away from home for school. She had a really tough time adjusting in her first year. She visited home every weekend and still did well in her courses, but adjusting still took some time. Thankfully, she lived in student housing with roommates that she liked, many of whom were in the same program, so she made friends who helped form that support system. What I'm trying to get at here is that your support system matters when you're juggling labs, studying, and volunteering, so keep that in mind. One final thing I'll mention is mental health and student wellness culture. Preparing for med school can be intense. A school that offers strong wellness support, accessible profs, and a collaborative rather than cutthroat environment will help you stay mentally strong and avoid burnout. A quick little insight, sometimes it's not just about the program, it's about the school environment that helps you stay well and do your best. Final takeaway, keep in mind that no program guarantees entry into medical school. What matters is how well you do and how intentional you are. The best program is one where you'll thrive, so pick one that plays to your strengths. We've covered a lot of ground in this video, from different program types to key pros and cons, as well as different strategic things to think about. If you like this kind of content and want to see more, feel free to like and subscribe, or even share with one other person who might find this interesting. Until next time, bye!